please welcome the CEO of CWT, Michelle McKinney Frymire, and the Managing Director and Global Aviation Leader at Deloitte, Bryan Terry, in conversation with Skift Corporate Travel Editor, Matthew Parsons.
A warm welcome to our next discussion where we'll be talking all things business travel. I'm delighted to be joined by Michelle McKinney Frymire, who's the CEO of corporate travel agency CWT, which is probably well inside the top two biggest agencies in the world. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Matt. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And also great to have Bryan Terry with us of Deloitte. He is a self-confessed road warrior and also a highly experienced aviation consultant. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Matt, and hello, Michelle. Glad to share a panel with you here today.
Thanks, Bryan.
Well, we've got about 25 minutes or so, I believe, for this discussion. I'm going to jump in, if that's okay, and let's go straight into the numbers. Now, everyone's got a prediction around when corporate, or if corporate travel will kind of bounce back to those levels of 2019. Michelle, you're in the unique position of kind of sitting in between the airlines and the actual people booking those flights, the business travelers. What's your take on the kind of recovery timeline at the moment?
You know, Matt, it's tough to predict like an exact science. And I will tell you, you see all sorts of answers and they range from right away till multiple years. But, you know, our view is that, one, we're super excited about the recovery that we're seeing now. In the last 2 months, we've really seen an increase in business travel, and it's really encouraging. And certainly the U.S. opening its borders has really helped with that and will continue to help. You know, I do think it's a multi-year recovery. I think we'll see significant rebound in travel in 22, but I don't know that in 22 we'll see the business get all the way back to where it was. I think there have been changes to how business travel works and what it means for people and how they want to use it. I'm sure Bryan can give you a feel for that as a road warrior himself, but you know, I think looking into 23 and beyond for a full recovery seems pretty prudent. And it's also pretty consistent with what we hear from some of our largest clients.
Yeah, okay. If I can turn to you, Bryan, you know, Deloitte published a report a few months ago, and I think you were pegging the recovery at around 65 to 80% by the end of 2022. Is that still the case, you know, having looked at, you know, the Delta variant, you know, recently?
Yes, thanks, Matt. I think that forecast is holding up reasonably well despite the ups and downs associated with the recent variants. I think we share a view similar to that of Michelle's in that we see this as a multi-year recovery. The survey you referenced, we conducted at the outset of summer amongst U.S. corporate travel managers, but those actually look after international travel for their companies as well. So even though it was U.S. focused, it had a global perspective. A couple things that I think we see with this is, one, obviously domestic markets and leisure markets are returning faster. And then we see that returning faster than anticipated. And I think in many cases, faster than airlines anticipated. I think, however, on the flip side, we see business travel returning slightly slower than anticipated. And slower than some of our airline clients are anticipating. We also see different markets recovering at different paces. Obviously, the U.S., given its large domestic market, is returning faster than those with more cross-border considerations, such as in Europe and Asia. But I think those trends will play out the same in those markets, and that the leisure market will recover faster than anticipated, and the business and international markets will recover a little bit slower.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, Matt, I would just add to what Bryan said, and we completely agree with his perspectives, that even when you look at someplace like Europe, the recovery is still pretty varied by country. We see countries like France, where they've returned much faster than, say, the UK and Ireland. So, you know, I think we do as an industry have to be prepared for that recovery to be dissimilar and disaggregated and different around the world. And it's about knowing, you know, where to put the supply and where the demand is going to be, that I think will really help the industry as a whole, particularly the airlines and the hotels.
Yeah. I've got a kind of topic subhead of how will service shift as expectations rise? Now, obviously, you know, we're talking about numbers. We've got to talk about policies as well. We've been hearing lots about sustainability with COP26. Also, airline bosses are weighing in. I think it was the CEO of Wizz Air was saying, the business class seat is the enemy of the environment pretty much the other day. Is sustainability filtering down yet to your customers, Michelle? Are they booking economy and not business class, for example?
This is such an interesting topic because it comes up all the time with our clients, and they do care deeply about doing the right thing from a sustainability perspective, but it really has yet to translate into deep, meaningful policy changes, right? We don't see yet clients saying, hey, I want to book the lowest direct fare, not the lowest logical fare, right? If you really want to drive sustainability, direct fares, one flight versus two, that could be meaningful, but you don't really see that taking place yet. I don't think that means though that it won't. I think first, a topic has to be really relevant and meaningful. And we do see that today. It's at the top of everybody's mind. They want the data to understand how what they're doing impacts the planet. So I think information will come first, policy will come second, and changes will kind of to the way people travel will actually come third. That's our view. But at every point, I think it is about having all the right information to really understand the impact of the decisions.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So not too much yet. And a question, same for you, Bryan. Obviously, Deloitte is one of the biggest spenders on air travel. How have your policies shifted recently in light of sustainability targets?
Yes, I think again, Michelle is on track there. Our policies, at least for the U.S., and I assume for many of our international firms is similar. Our policies have not changed yet in direct association with sustainability commitments. However, we do expect that. Where we are seeing a difference is in terms of, from a compliance perspective, is not necessarily changes in the policy, but greater enforcement of existing policy. So trips have a higher degree of scrutiny to get approved. They have to demonstrate a tangible business impact. And I think that's not only at Deloitte, but what we're hearing from other corporate travel managers as well. Likewise, there's a greater adherence to company policy in regards to either lowest fare, or in some cases, as Michelle was mentioning, direct flights. And there's another component I would like to add to the mix here, and that's overall well-being, which is associated with sustainable practices. And one of the things that, a second degree impact of COVID has been the impact on the talent and labor markets. There's shortages across all industries. Certainly our airline clients are really challenged to find the right talent to service their operations. But likewise, corporates like ourselves, Michelle's and others, we're fighting for talent as well. As part of that, you're seeing policies, while may not be restricted, but policies that are more well-being and quality and balance focused. So enabling people to book up to premium economy or book a first class seat, where in some cases they may not have been able to in the past.
Okay, so still the business class seat is still has a future for the moment now. Sticking with policies and kind of trends that the airlines should be picking up on, what else are you seeing from a kind of a premium economy perspective, or even lounges? I mean, Michelle, you used to work at an airline. I don't know if you can tell us, what trends airlines should be watching out for nowadays.
Well, Matt, it's interesting that the policy changes have not been significant through the pandemic. If anything, there's almost been a little bit of a relaxing of policies. So, I think people at the beginning of the pandemic, people who did have to travel, being in a premium cabin or in a premium seat made them feel a little bit more comfortable, a little less close to their neighbor. We're not seeing big shifts there in terms of people's policies. In fact, I think that's tied to what Bryan said. The battle for talent is real. And, when people have to travel for the work that they do, for us or for Deloitte or for any company, we want them to be engaged, productive, for the travel to be impactful, for it to have a business meaning. But we also want the employee to be happy and productive. And I think there's a little bit of a push-pull on policies in that sense. If you think about it, reducing who could travel up front or in a premium seat, depending on the flight, that could be viewed as an anti-competitive move by companies where their competitors in the war for talent were still allowing those things. So I don't think you're seeing a lot of movement on that the way you might have expected. And I do think that is in part to what Bryan mentioned about the real battle for talent that's ongoing in the world today.
Okay, so really closely aligned to those airline trends. Bryan, what about you? I mean, you've been traveling a lot recently, I gather. What have you picked up? Any sort of shortfalls that you've seen from the airlines that you'd like to see addressed for the business traveler nowadays?
Sure. Well, I think the road warriors are pretty accustomed to disruptions and things going awry. So I think we have a little bit more patience for the airlines. However, I think that patience will soon start to run out as business travelers start to return. Some of the things that we're seeing and experiencing is service levels, certainly on board, and in some cases in the lounges have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Lounges, for what I've been experiencing recently, is actually a case of overcrowding, and that oasis that you want to experience in a lounge is simply not there. So I think airlines are going to have to think about the lounge experience perhaps a little bit differently. How can they innovate? How can they reimagine that? How can they potentially turn that into more of a revenue source rather than just something on a complementary basis? So I think there's a lot to play when it comes to, again, attracting and retaining the business traveler. And I'll add one other piece to that. Coming out of the pandemic, many airlines have extended status levels. But in many respects, loyalty is up for grabs again. So airlines are going to have to double down their efforts to retain their most loyal travelers. And I think there's an opportunity for them to differentiate those who can identify and attract that next wave of high value customers.
Yeah. Okay. And we can't talk about business travel without talking about airfares and potential increases. What's your take on that, Michelle? I mean, we hear, I think American Airlines released some very some flexible rates for this high demand business routes, which is unusual. What's your take? I mean, are they going to go up a lot next year? Are they going to kind of stabilize? I mean, what should travel managers be looking out for?
Well, if you look back at the times where this industry has had real disruption, whether it was 9/11 or the financial crisis, you always see that fares trail in recovery behind volume. So I think that will still be true. We see that today. Airfares on average, the average trip value is still as a percent to 2019 below where the number of trips is. Now, that being said, airlines have streamlined, they have taken capacity out of the system, and there is real discrete supply in certain markets. And I think airlines are pretty good and have been historically about taking advantage of pricing power where it exists. If you look at the typical airline, they've got an enormous organization devoted to how they set fares and how they manage those fares from a revenue management perspective. They've really, quite frankly, perfected that science. Where I think airlines have shifted is their understanding and what they've implemented around flexibility, right? I love that airlines have rolled back the, omnipresent change fee in many cases. And I think that business travelers really like that. And to Bryan's point about loyalty being up for grabs, which I agree with, having more flexibility, lower change fees, better policies for those business travelers are going to matter. And so I think, airlines are going to have to really think about that when it comes to, how much can I raise fares as long as that fare is flexible and can be changed and reused without onerous penalties. I think airlines will find themselves with greater pricing power if they retain that flexibility that they've put in place as a part of the pandemic.
Okay, interesting. And Bryan, you talk to many airlines. I know you can't really talk about those discussions in detail, but what are you saying to your airline customers at the moment when it comes to pricing?
Well, I think it's a very interesting area. I think there's some push-pull effects here. We agree with Michelle in that it's a multi-stage recovery. I think everyone is focused on traffic returning to 2019 levels by 2023 or 2024 beyond. We've always also had the view that yields and profits would trail and come back later. I think, though, however, there are some unique or not so unique forces in play here in this current stage. One is energy prices. Fuel is up 30% or more year over year. We talked about talent. So airlines are having to pay a lot more for talent, both in skilled positions such as pilots, technicians, but also cabin crew, staff, front office, etc. So the cost of talent has gone up. And then the long-term impact is going to be the cost of sustainability, whether that comes in the form of carbon taxes or premiums for sustainable aviation fuel or investments in carbon capture technology, etc. But there will be a cost associated with sustainability. And those three forcing functions will dictate that prices have to rise to a certain degree. I think Michelle touched on something very important. That will help separate kind of winners from losers in the future. Pretty much every airline cut to the bone during the crisis. It's those carriers who can maintain those cost cuts and not just bring the costs back with the traffic. How can they be more nimble, more flexible, more agile, etc., and be able to return the capacity, return the service levels to prior levels, but not at the same cost levels. And I think those who do that more successfully than others will be borne out in the market.
Yeah, I mean, by the sounds of it, you've just described, kind of the low-cost carrier model, haven't you? I guess. I mean, they've been pretty nimble and more flexible, perhaps, because they've got, I guess, smaller planes, or they're able to move around the fleets a lot more quickly. Are they going to come out stronger, do you think, from the pandemic when it comes to kind of winning business travelers, maybe from the legacy carriers?
Is that for me, Matt?
Yeah, or Michelle.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm happy to jump in. So certainly many of the largest, more successful low-cost carriers in the world, specifically those in the European and North American theaters, entered the pandemic probably in a more stronger position to begin with. So they emerged with more healthy balance sheets. Their fleets were also better positioned, being a narrow body fleet rather than wide bodies. And their market, i.e. leisure markets, were better suited for the return to travel. So they are taking advantage of that leisure return, but also you see low-cost carriers, particularly in the US market, you're also seeing it again in Europe. They are now taking opportunity to enter business markets that were previously difficult to enter due to slot restrictions, airport restrictions, gate availability, etc. So while I don't see them taking huge percentages of market share away from the network carriers in terms of business, I do think you will see them gain a material increase in net share, and that could come at the expense of the network carriers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, Matt, the thing I might add to that is remember that ultimately the business traveler has a specific destination in mind. So they're not out shopping for what's the coolest place I can go in a fare that's in my price range. They know they need to go to San Francisco, and they know they need to go on Wednesday or Thursday. And so I think the low-cost carrier comments are accurate, but only to the extent that the networks are serving the routes that the business traveler needs to travel on. In the end, the business traveler is not going to make 2 stops or 3 stops on a low-cost carrier just to save $100, because they're weighing the productivity and the time they spend traveling with the value of their trip. And so I think it will ultimately come down to having the right assets in the right place for these airlines.
Yeah. Okay. And what about private jets? We've heard, jets have been been a popular choice in the pandemic because they've been able to kind of get around certain restrictions and just again avoid any potential health problems. Are you seeing any sort of tangible uptick in corporate jet bookings from clients?
Well, you know, from our perspective, that has not been a meaningful change. And if you look at the price differential, it's still so significant. You're still talking about paying 5, 7, 10 times what you would to take a trip. Even if you said, hey, I'm going to take the trip in first class, I'm going to pay for first class, that private jet is still vastly more expensive. And so it's not really reached a point from a pricing perspective that you see a lot of movement with corporate clients. I think high-end luxury travelers on a leisure side, it's a whole other different world out there. But on a business perspective, you just don't see your large clients saying, hey, you know, take a private jet. We don't care if it costs 10 times.
Yeah. Okay. Or maybe electric air taxis in the future. That could be something we'll be talking about in a few years' time. To try and stay with innovation at the moment. I mean, you know, one area we've seen, you know, the last 18 months has been, you know, there hasn't been much flying or traveling, so companies have had time to kind of reflect and pause on their own systems and technology. And you know, we've been covering the subscription model quite a lot recently, you know, with travel agencies as well as other companies. And I'm just wondering, you know, are you seeing perhaps any appetite for the subscription model in the future? I mean, is this something, Bryan, you know, has come up in your conversations with airlines?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating area to explore, and I think airlines are certainly thinking about that. I think there's probably kind of a wait and see approach, and also they've got bigger priorities right now, especially the larger network carriers. Again, I think if you look to the low-cost carriers, in addition to Michelle's exactly right, they've got to be in the right markets with the right flight schedules to even have a chance. But they could be the ones who could take more chances, be more innovative in the marketplace to try to differentiate themselves. But I think it's going to be an interesting space to watch.
Yeah.
You know, Matt, where I do think that pricing models are changing rapidly, and we've seen it and have been really responsive to it, is on the business travel agency side for the TMC. What we know that clients want is predictability. They want to be able to know, what is my cost going to be? You know, how much am I going to spend? They want to have line of sight to it. And those kind of fixed versus variable or more subscription-like pricing models have been a big part of the conversations that we've been having. And I can see that that's got a lot of momentum. You know, clients in general, companies in general, CWT, Deloitte, and others, we all want to have more predictability to the costs, whether it's supply chain driven costs or procurement driven costs. And, you know, I think this is a place where the space is really ripe for innovation. And I'm excited about the things that I see people doing because it's making it better for both the TMC and the client.
Yeah, sure thing. Also talking about kind of, you know, airline innovations, we need to talk about alliances. I mean, are they part of the conversation, do you think, in the recovery phase? I mean, are we going to see more alliances between airlines that could open up more subscriptions? I mean, what's your take on that, Bryan, in terms of the kind of consortia amongst airlines?
Yeah, there's several different variants of that. So there's the alliances that most people are familiar with. But I think where our airline customers are placing greater emphasis right now at this stage is on shoring up their joint ventures and their equity relationships, which have been disrupted severely through the pandemic, as some of those partners are in better health or worse health than others. So how do you restore your joint ventures, your private equity, and then looking at your alliances? And I think probably more so than the passenger and the commercial side here, where those entities have historically been focused. I think airlines and alliances are starting to see the opportunity to use more shared services. Again, going back to the theme of how can we control manageable cost that doesn't necessarily impact the customer service. And they're looking to alliances as ways to achieve that.
Yeah. Okay. Which could kind of filter down to the business travelers and maybe, you know, lower costs for them. You know, you mentioned disruption there. Michelle, you know, we talking of disruption, you know, CWT only last week came out of a very, very quick bankruptcy protection process. You've raised some more money. You've got money to spend $100 million on technology. How are you going to kind of steer CWT in this next chapter now?
Yeah, Thanks, Matt. It's a super exciting time for us, right? We were pleased to be able to implement our restructuring plan so quickly. It just shows the strong support that we had, and we're really excited about the investment that we're going to be making. If you take that and you break it down, one, the booking experience itself, super important for travelers and travel arrangers. What can you do in the MyCWT app? How integrated can we be? That's really important for us and a big focus. Data and analytics, also a really important focus. Companies want their dollars spent on travel to be optimized. They want to know where they're spending, how's it getting spent, what's the ROI, how do we combine it with other data? I think that's super important. Content, NDC, aggregation of content, also super important. And last, but certainly not least in our mind, sustainability. How do you get the right data in people's hands at the decision point when they're making the booking to know the impact that their travel will have? How do you make sure that that data is available to the traveler, the travel arranger at the point where they're making that decision, so that it's not an afterthought, right? Hey, let me go back and think about a carbon offset, but let me think about the impact of the decision I'm making right here. And, those are some of the areas where we're going to continue to transform and continue to help our industry not just evolve, but revolutionize the way people think about travel. And we're super excited about the investments that we're going to be making.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the updates on that. I think we are pretty much run out of time with this particular discussion. So I just want to say thanks again for joining us at the forum today.
Thanks for having us. And thank you, Bryan, for being here as well.
Thank you, Michelle and Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks both.